Hey friends, thanks for taking time to listen in on a conversation Dick and I had with three guests, Shalabh Gupta, Amran Nawaz, and Daniel Nazareth about Andretti's F1 bid. Last year, I read a fantastic article titled, quote, Demystifying Andretti's Failed F1 Bid and Anti-Dilution Fees Explained, end quote. As you'll hear, this conversation dives into the business of Formula One. But before we get to our conversation, I need to ask, can you help us out? If you haven't already, please take a moment to follow us and give us 5 stars on your favorite podcast app, as well as share this episode with other F1 fans. We know our growth is because of you, and the guys and I thank you. Hope you enjoy our conversation. Okay, Dick, we have another interview. I don't think we've ever done this many people in a conversation unless it was like a friends of the podcast. And here's the thing. We've actually done a little bit of pre-interview and I'm already excited. I can't wait to now have the official on the record. Maybe, people are going to feel a little bit of FOMO because we've already had some fun before we turned on the recorder. What do you think?
Well, that's what they get for not being asked to be interviewed by us in the first place. So if they have FOMO, well, they're, so sorry, so sad, one of those kind of deals. But anyway, this is going to be great. This is such a different conversation than what we've had before. And yet it is all about the business of F1. And I'm super excited. I've read what these gentlemen have produced. It's incredibly impressive. I learned a lot, and I think our listeners are going to walk away with a whole new appreciation for what's going on from the business side of this sport.
I agree. So I'm going to let each one of them go round robin, introduce themselves, tell us their names, and also a little bit about their motorsport background. And then we'll go into the actual conversation.
I will go first. So my name is Amran. So happy to be here. As you alluded to already, extremely excited based on our brief conversations before we started recording. And so, with regards to motorsports, I'm very blessed to have a motorsports background, both personally and professionally. Personally, I grew up in a racing family, so racing's in my blood from both sides of the family. I grew up racing motorcycles from a young age. I was born in England and started racing there. And then when I was 12, I moved to Canada and started racing here. And then ultimately was racing professionally as I progressed through the ranks for the Canadian Superbike series. So that's our national racing series. And then professionally, believe it or not, even though I'm an accountant, I work in finance. I'm very fortunate to work in sports and motorsports as well, in terms of dealing with commercial agreements, financial regulations, athlete earnings and loss of earnings, things like that. So that's it for me, and excited to see where this podcast goes.
Awesome. Thank you. Daniel, do you want to go next?
Yeah, thanks, Sabrina, and thanks, Dick, for hosting us. Dick, we love the kudos that you gave us at the beginning. Definitely a big ego stroke, so appreciate that. My name's Daniel, and I don't have a motorsports background outside of attending people's birthday parties and doing go-karts. But I am a competitor. I grew up playing competitive hockey, soccer, and badminton. And now I run. So I do races, marathons, and I have a 10K in December. We were talking before about the weather here in Canada, but yeah, I've decided to put on my boots and go for a run.
Oh, wow.
On December 8th. So that'll be exciting. From a professional standpoint, I actually did my undergrad in life sci, and then I was a pharmaceutical sales rep for 2 years. And then I joined the dark side of accounting, did a master's in management and professional accounting. And I did 2 years in audit at a Big Four. And now I'm here at Secretariat and happy to be working with Shalabh and Amran. And I jumped at the opportunity to help collaborate on the F1 article. So thanks for that, guys. And I'll pass it over to Shalabh now.
Thank you so much, Daniel. And thank you so much, Sabrina and Dick, to have us on this podcast. It's a pleasure to be interviewed by the two of you. And as both of you alluded, the pre-conversations have really gotten me excited. And I'm really looking forward to our conversation. Again, my background in sports is not as fancy as Amran. I've tried my hand on different sports from cricket to football and basketball, but all of that was at school and college level. And since then, I've gotten hit by life, as they say,
Oh, yeah.
And
Know about that? Yeah.
and then, when I started my career as a CPA, I started it in India. I was working with Big Four and a few other boutique consulting firms for a few years. And then I moved to Toronto in 2019, and I've been with the firm called Secretariat. And we act as financial advisors and economic damages experts in corporate disputes. And for the past, I would say, 2 years or so, we've been actively pursuing opportunities in the sports sector. And all three of us are really, really excited to be working on a few matters, which is a great cross section between what we are passionate about and what we do professionally. So
that's really cool. That's really cool. And I have to say that in the case of Amran, it's nice to have a fellow adrenaline junkie on the podcast, because there's a lot of people who look at me like I'm a little bit crazy, but anybody who's riding super bikes, immediate respect, brother. I'm telling you, because that is seriously extreme. So good on you.
Thank you. I'm surprised my parents decided to put me into this as a young child, but I won't judge them, and I'm very happy that they did.
Yeah. My poor mother, she suffered greatly when I was racing. So anyway.
I'm so excited. If anything, I think it's so fantastic that all three of you found each other in your professional, and you've been able to merge your professional and your passion together and put out such a quality product, which is what actually brought me an awareness of who you guys are. And to let the audience know, I became aware of y'all after reading an article within the Law and Sport newsletter. It's a publication. It's for lawyers who are obviously trying to be in the world of sports. And you wrote an article titled Demystifying Andretti's Failed F1 Bid and Anti-Dilution Fees Explained. And that was actually in June of 2024. And as much as I know our listeners have been following the story, so I told you guys in the pre-call, I mean, everybody has an opinion. Social media is full of this. I think what was so great was what you guys brought was the technical as well as the financial considerations. And maybe as the nerd and the lawyer here, I was like, oh, this is what needs to be out there. I felt like, let's have this conversation with you guys. And I was so glad that John and Dick thought this was a great opportunity for us to educate our audience. So I think as much as the facts are out there, I think a restatement of those facts would be good. So do you think one of you could walk us through what happened first up until your actual article? And then, of course, we all know a lot has happened since you wrote the article, and tell us, kind of set that table for us, if you don't mind.
Of course. Yeah, no, I would love to. And I don't think we could have picked a better time to record this podcast, given the events that have transpired over the last week or two. And so, to set the stage, I mean, as you'll know, but so really there's two key stakeholders, at least from the F1's perspective, with regards to Andretti's initial application. And so you have the FIA and you have FOM. And so FIA are the governing body, and they're generally responsible for regulating the sport, dealing with the technical and the safety aspects of Formula One. And then you have FOM, and they are generally responsible for the commercial aspect. So the development of F1, including the management of promotion, the media rights, sponsorship agreements, and those types of things. And so to take you way back to the beginning, so in March of 2023, FIA had invited applications for potential new entrants on the F1 grid. And this would essentially expand the grid from the 10 current teams. So there would be a new joiner, and there would be 11 in total. And the FIA had received several applications, and a few of those had advanced through to the second stage. But ultimately, it was the Andretti General Motors partnership, and it was their application was the only one that was deemed to meet the technical criteria that was set out from the FIA. So FIA had approved it from a technical perspective, and life was good. And then what had happened is the FOM had looked at this application from a commercial perspective, and they found that this proposed team wouldn't bring adequate competitive or commercial value if they were to join the grid. And this is where we got really excited, because now we're talking about F1 and we're talking about value and valuations. And this is our bread and butter, and this is what keeps me awake at night. And so we wanted to ultimately try to assess the application and assess why it may be deemed to not bring sufficient value. And so we wanted to look at this and look at the reasons why from a financial perspective. So we looked into the business operations of Formula One and how the prize money is allocated between teams. We looked at the anti-dilution fee that's set out in the Concord Agreement, the recent rise in the valuation of Formula One teams, and things like that. And at that time, so this was around June of this year, June of 2024, we essentially concluded, after looking at all of these factors, was that to join or to have a new team join the grid, they would either need to pay a higher anti-dilution fee than what was set out in the Concord Agreement, or they would have to purchase a stake in an existing team, so there wouldn't be a new team on the grid. And this was around the time that we met Sabrina shortly after. And I think also during the summer, I think the US Congress was somewhat involved from what I've seen reported in the media, and there were some letters circulated back and forth. And so at that time, I didn't really hear much in terms of news that had developed and sort of put this case on the back burner, if you will, until around a week ago. And I had refreshed my news feed, and all of a sudden I read right at the top that there's an 11th team that will be joining the grid. And this team will be a GM Cadillac team without Michael Andretti. And so we looked into this a little bit further, and I mean, it appears, at least from what's been reported in the media, that the team's very similar to what was previously proposed by GM and Andretti earlier this year, or at least when the application was denied. But in this case, there is no Andretti involvement, and the anti-dilution fee that will be paid will be significantly higher than the $200 million in the Concord Agreement. So as things stands right now, it looks as if there will be an 11th team on the grid for the 2025 or 2026 season.
So just for my knowledge, FOM, was that originally set up by Bernie Ecclestone, and that was what was purchased by Liberty? Is that how that worked?
Yeah, that is correct, Dick. So somewhere around 2008 or 9, there was a little bit of an internal, discomfort or disconnect, and they requested bifurcation of the F1 operations to segregate the technical and the commercial aspects of things, which allowed the teams to get their hold on the commercial deals and sponsorship agreements, and get a better hold of the financial aspects of the sport.
And so back in that time, I'm having to line up 2008 versus when some of this happened, but there was another team that came in using the Lotus name. It wasn't really Lotus, and they eventually had to change their name to Caterham. And it seemed like there was another team as well that was it had its origins in Campos, but they renamed themselves to something else that escapes me right now. Both of those teams kind of came and went. And I can't remember if this was pre-FOM or just after FOM, but I'm curious, do you guys believe that the experiences with those two failed teams actually contributed then to some of the issues that we saw on this next time around? Or do you think it was more the anti-dilution fee is not enough, and these guys are going to be cutting into our share of the prize money?
I think it was a bit of both, and my gut would be that it was a bit more towards the latter part that you suggested, because what also happened was, taking a step back, after Liberty Media took over the operations of F1, they did a tremendous job, and they commercialized the sport really, really well, which led to the valuations of the team really rise too much. And around 2020, they also introduced something called as cost cap, which we can dive deeper if needed for the question. But what that did is it brought certainty for each team as an owner and a financial investment, that there would be returns. Otherwise, it turned out to be an endless pit where you just keep throwing money for research and development of cars, but not get much in return. And once you have that in place, the valuations of the team significantly increased. And the anti-dilution fee in the current Concord Agreement was set around 2020, and it was set at $200 million, which, if you would see earlier this year or towards mid of last year, there were a few transactions. For example, the Aston Martin transaction. The teams were valued at $1 billion. If you think about it, if you are getting a team for $200 million and you're spending additional, say, $400 to $500 million on spending on development of your car and your team and all the infrastructure that you need to develop your team to compete in the paddock, you are essentially getting your team for $700 to $750 million.
Mhm.
So there is a delta of a good $250 million. So if I am an investor and I see that I've just purchased a team for $1 billion and someone else can join for a little less than that, that's a good chunk of pocket change that I won't like.
Yep.
I think that is what kind of pushed everyone to say that you should not be doing this. And that's why, as Amran alluded, there was probably a closed room discussion, which, even though the Concord Agreement states that the anti-dilution fee is $200 million, it has been reported that Cadillac would be paying close to $450 or $500 million as anti-dilution fee.
So do you think that's what changed the calculation ultimately, was the anti-dilution fee change? Or do you think there were other factors?
There seems to be other factors involved as well. I mean, it's a significant investment for anyone, right? So there were definitely some form of, and over the next few days or months, you will get to know more as details come out. GM has taken center stage, and they would be committing a bit more on, developing the power engine and power unit. For the long term, I think that is what would help the sport, along with the money.
So I guess then when you guys wrote your article in June of this year, what do you think at that point were the positives and the challenges of having an 11th team, and then have any of those forecasts changed now that we know that an 11th team is making its way on the grid? Like, do you think that those are actually going to be reality, especially now that we know some of the calculations have changed? Do you see where I'm kind of leaning towards?
Daniel, do you want to take that?
Yeah, sure, I can. I think an increased level of competition definitely benefits fans. And from a technical standpoint, they're claiming that they're going to eventually have their own power unit, that definitely brings a huge pro to having that additional team, because portion of the competition is the drivers, but it's also the car. So if you can foster competition from the technical aspect, then you do have a lot more advancements. I think also, like, developing talent is something that's really important, and having drivers, like 2 more additional drivers, would definitely be something that would interest everybody, the fans and the additional teams, because you can have greater representation of different types of people, and therefore you can enter different markets because everyone wants to see someone who looks like them driving a really expensive car. So I think those are some of the pros. Some of the cons, aside from ones that we kind of mentioned, with the anti-dilution fee and taking kind of a piece of the pie from the existing teams, would be a packed grid. So more cars on the paddock, you have the same size that you're racing. That might be a challenge for drivers to navigate. And then also, one of the things that they mentioned in their FOM, what they mentioned was essentially the initial competitiveness of the 11th team. And that's something that, kind of, Dick, you were alluding to with the 2 teams that had failed in the past, not being able to be competitive and get podium wins. It is a competition that is driven by the costs that you incur, but with the cost cap, I don't know if that puts an additional burden on a new team, because they can't just spend whatever they want, or it's a benefit to the team because you do have that, like, Ferrari is a team that's been around for a long time, right? So they have that intangible asset. They have that knowledge base that they've already secured. So I'll pass it to Shalabh and Amran if they want to add anything more to that.
Well, and I would just throw out too, I mean, Daniel, you make a great point, is that, Ferrari's been around forever, for, the duration of F1. And you think about a Williams that suffered when there was no cost cap, right? And, what is it? James Vowles said we're 7 or 8 years behind the top teams because of the lack of investment and all that, because they were throwing money just to run the cars, and they didn't have the budget for all the capital expenditure that they needed to invest. So that's a great point. I mean, General Motors won't have that problem, but the problem is that they won't have the people running around with the intellectual property between their ears, so to speak. So anyway, that's my take.
Yeah.
No, I completely agree with both Daniel and Dick, like what you've mentioned. Obviously, there would be some benefits that the GM team would get from the operations of the Andretti team and the other IndyCar and other stuff, but F1 is a different beast in itself. So transitioning all your technical know-how and all your experiences from other teams would only go so far, and they would need a few other people to help them develop the competitive F1 team, a great power engine, power unit, and obviously, all the logistics that you need around running the team.
It seems like to me that even looking at Williams today or Aston, and that we've talked about this on other episodes, the team actually needing to know how to win, not like segregating the technical aspect of it, right? Or the financial. It's all interconnected. So you're expecting a team to hit the ground running, to know how to do this with the technical innovation and the strategy, making sure that they bring in the right drivers and they're financed well. I can see, like, the non-cynical side of me can see why there was skepticism by FOM of after we've made this large amount of investment inside of this industry and brought it to such a level of valuation. And I didn't know the history that Dick gave us about in the Ecclestone era. I can see now a little bit better why there was a reluctance. Now, of course, we all know there's politics and stuff like that, and we don't want to necessarily go into that direction. But I think that that's an important thing, that as people are thinking about this, that they realize there are some legitimate concerns that a stakeholder would have, as any business would, about someone coming in. I wonder, in y'all's mind, do you think that this was the process? And maybe you don't know this, so you can tell me that. Was this the process that was used during the Ecclestone era, like the pre-Liberty era? Or was this this whole segregation with the FIA, FOM, and even the way that the teams were brought into the conversation, even I don't know how much were brought in intentionally, as much as off the record, behind the closed doors kind of conversation. Did you feel like this was the same? And if so, like, what do you think the stakeholders probably were thinking? Like, if you were advising them, would be the other side. Like, pretend you were sitting there advising Mercedes or Williams on the other end of the spectrum of financial strength and even, the notoriety, I guess, of the teams.
Well, that's definitely part of my dreamland. Sitting next to Mercedes and Williams team. And advising them on financial issues. I mean, that's the best section I would love to.
Who knows? They may be listening to this and they go, these guys are guys that we got to have in their team. So give them the best advice.
That's right.
So just, breaking up your questions into two. So the first part that you asked, has the process changed a lot for, just evaluating the teams and their applications? Personally, I don't think it has changed significantly, at least not on the technical aspects. Obviously, the commercial side has evolved significantly, I would say, in 2 or 3 different tranches. Obviously, the first part would be when they actually segregated the commercial rights and the ability to negotiate collectively with sponsors and broadcasting rights and so on and so forth. And the second would be post cost cap era, which COVID basically led to leading a couple of teams in the pit, and no pun intended. But that kind of gave a few people a very, very hard time. And the cost cap has definitely worked wonders for everyone. Mm-hmm. And the conversation has suddenly changed from, finding ways to sustain to finding ways to expand to newer markets, to newer locations, to newer races. And, with the introduction, and probably this will be a good segue as well, finding new value on new market segments. For example, if we find ways to get, women racers involved, that is going to open a different market segment that F1 can now tap into. Mm-hmm. So looking at all different aspects, commercializing everything, and as we know, American sports in general are really great at finding ways to commercialize everything. So it's not just about competitive spirits, it's also about business when it comes to American sports.
Without a doubt. And I think you bring a really good point for people who maybe entered the era of Formula One in the last 2, 3, maybe 4 years, is what you just said about the conversation quickly changed from sustainability of the sport not sustainability and energy, but I mean, as in the business can continue, to now let's expand. And when you look at that from a business perspective, that's a huge culture change. And that requires us understanding as fans what a sharp change that was for the community as a whole, especially coming at it from the business. So I think that's a very wise insight that you've just provided. So let me ask you this then. Do you think that other applications will be accepted in the future? Or do you think they're going to want to take some time and see how this plays out? Like looking at it again from a financial perspective.
I think personally that, I think they may be hesitant to allow an additional team in the short term. I think given the potential difficulties, let's say that we've heard about that a new team may face as they enter the grid, I think obviously now it looks as if we're going to be having an 11th team, but I do think there would be some hesitation before an additional team or a 12th team would enter the grid. Having said that, I know Formula One did have 12 teams not too long ago, so I think it's maybe a little bit trial and error, but I think within the next maybe 5 or 10 years, I could definitely see a 12th team joining the grid, especially, I guess depending on how this team fares once they join in a couple of years' time.
Dick, I have a question for you. I know we're interviewing them, but you have longevity in the sport. I'm not calling you old, but
even though I am, but go ahead.
And you have such technical knowledge. I'm thinking more about the size of the cars and how we struggle even now to see things like competitive overtaking because of and even the ground effects aspect, all the things that we've talked about in our tech series. Yep. Do you see it even practical to continue to add an additional team, like 11 teams? Okay, but going back to earlier eras where the cars were different, do you see that as being realistic?
Well, I think it depends on the track, right? I mean, at Monaco, 20 cars is probably too many, if we really wanted to get real here. But, on some of the more modern circuits, or even if you think about, like a Las Vegas, or a Baku street circuit, those are long tracks. And so the cars are going to get spread out. And, you think about like the turbulence that a ground effect car generates at 200 miles an hour. You get 20 of those cars or 22, the initial turbulence for the first few laps has got to be just staggering for the drivers. I mean, as people who haven't experienced that, it's got to be amazing. I've talked to IndyCar drivers who have said that at the start of the Indy 500, if you're starting in sort of the back 3 or 4 rows, and again, ground effect cars going 200 miles an hour, they said that you cannot possibly understand the kind of turbulence that you're getting. And secondly, the draft is so strong coming off the cars up front that you're literally being sucked along behind those other guys. And of course, your front wing aerodynamics are gone because you're in this massive draft. So it becomes really exciting going through the corners because you can turn the steering wheel and, it's sort of like nobody's home at first anyway. And so that's going to be the same on a Formula One track, maybe not to the extent at Indianapolis because the speed envelope is not the same, but it's still going to be an absolute factor, I think. And again, like Monaco, I think 22 cars is going to be really interesting there. Can you imagine coming up on lap traffic when you've got that, 2 more cars on the track? It's going to be busy.
Yeah. It sounds like, if anything, this would need to be considerations for not only which tracks, but the F1 calendar itself. And even revisiting things such as, I think you've mentioned this pre-qualifying, the format of actually how we actually race might need to be reevaluated if you continue to expand the grid. So maybe Cadillac will be a good test case to see if they can do it, pull it off, and the return on investment, and will give everyone a confidence that this can continue and we could see something that increases. Or, hey, this was proof of concept, did not show up, and we need to just reevaluate, and it'll, just like any market, it'll shake itself out eventually. Okay, so guys, we asked you more on your technical side about all of this, but give us your personal thoughts about the twists and turns that we've seen over the course of this, if you don't mind.
I can probably begin, and I'll let Amran and Daniel add their thoughts as well. So the 11th team would definitely, add value in my perspective, in my view, personal opinion. Monaco definitely would be a challenge, and it is one of the best tracks in the world for sure. And I know they have recently, renewed their lease with the track and extended it. Other tracks would probably get more competitive and exciting. And also the upcoming changes in the 2026, technical specifications of the cars would hopefully make it a bit more competitive. And you would not be waiting, everyone for a few seconds after Max Verstappen to see the second car on the street. So hopefully it will get a bit more competitive and make the sport a lot more attractive for everyone.
I think just to piggyback on that, Shalabh, and I love your optimism, but I mean, the one thing that's been on my mind over the last week or so was that, and I mentioned this earlier, I'm not sure what has significantly changed from a technical perspective between the original Andretti GM application and now the GM Cadillac application. And, of course, as we've discussed, the Andretti GM application was rejected due to what was deemed to be a lack of a competitive package. And since it's still going to be a GM, eventually a GM power unit, I'm not convinced that this car or this team could be maybe significantly more competitive than the proposed Andretti one. So as much as I would like to think that this will increase the competition in the short term, and it very well may, that's sort of been the one thing on my mind in terms of challenges of this new team, just given that the initial application, like I said, was deemed to not be competitive enough to join the grid.
Sounds like you were advising the teams in that one.
Well, that's the fun of working with Amran. It's not just this particular topic. We always, have this banter going on. That's what keeps us alive and keeps us going in.
That's great.
In the deep world of Excel.
Yeah. Well, hey, the world of Excel, that overwhelms me just to think about it's like opening up Excel. So the fact that y'all can find joy in that, kudos to you. So, I mean, and we like having differing opinions here. That we don't all have to agree. So this is interesting, though, the skepticism that you have, Amran. And I think for me, especially, I'm very neutral. So I'm going to be interested to see where Daniel lies in this.
Yes, as the objective third party, I'll like to come in between both and say that I'm optimistic, and I agree with Amran too. I'm excited to see more details as they're produced of what the application looks like. I think to take this in a different light, I love to build Lego. So for me, I'm really excited to buy one of those Lego pieces and just build in the GM Cadillac car and have it as a memento for this bit of work that we put together for the article. I'll have the article on my fridge, and then beside that will be a Lego piece.
So awesome. Now we know that that's got to be on your Christmas wish list, or any of your family and friends. They need to be listening to this, so that way they know that that's your item that they need to get.
I've already written a letter to Father Christmas. So
that's great.
My take on it, not that you asked for it, Sabrina, but my take is that I also hold with the deal that the Andretti Cadillac versus the GM Cadillac proposals are not that different. But I look at it from looking at GM's history. That is a highly competitive group of folks that are racers, and they 95% of going racing is knowing how to go racing, right? And so they know how to go racing, and they're going to figure it out. And the first couple of years, I'm expecting that they're going to get their heads handed to them on a platter. But after a while, they're going to start figuring it out, and because they're going to get mad, and they're highly competitive, and they will find a way to go out and hand it to these guys. And so it ought to be interesting to watch them fail and then get better and learn from their failure and then ramp it up. And ultimately they will be successful, but it's not going to be overnight. No way.
Again, the optimistic side, they could pull a Braun and win the entire thing in 2026. Like Gan did in 2009. I mean, I'm always rooting for the underdog. So always excited to see new people coming in.
Oh yeah.
Okay, so we've got this on record, and now when 2025, 2026 happens, we'll see who's right. Come back to this if you guys are willing to come back on the show after today.
Yeah,
for sure.
Okay, good.
So one thing I do want to raise. So let's think about this. There was another team that came in, I think right around the time Liberty bought F1, and that's Haas. And Haas didn't get anywhere near the angst, let's call it, the resistance that the Andretti GM deal got, which actually proves what you guys have been saying, which is the value of Formula One has become so high that adding Haas, not that big a deal. Now, big deal. Is that a fair statement?
I believe so. So, I mean, as I mentioned previously as well, the conversation for Formula One has turned from how do we sustain this entire competition and race teams and so on and so forth into expansion into new markets, looking at new market segments, new racetracks, increasing the number of races that we are doing every year. So obviously it's becoming more and more valuable asset. And I think we also discussed this in our article that for the other American major leagues, for example, the National Hockey League, all the anti-dilution fee or expansion fee, as they also call it, they directly link with the market transaction values. And if there are any increases in the market transaction values, the anti-dilution fee is also increased. And if it is true that GM actually paid $450 million instead of $200 million, which was part of the Concord Agreement terms, that would kind of clarify a bit that it was also related to what value in terms of dollars that would come in. Because the other aspect which we discuss in the article is how the anti-dilution fee is distributed. So, for example, the teams get their money from the F1, the prize pot is distributed between 10 teams. Now, instead of, there's obviously a formula, but for the sake of discussion, let's assume that everything is distributed equally. And in case there is an 11th team on the grid, now everything is being divvied up between 11 teams. So every team is getting a smaller slice of the pie. And the anti-dilution fee has to, compensate the teams for these smaller slices. And if $200 million is not enough, the question was, what is?
Yeah.
So it's a bit of both of, how the value is calculated, which is basically economic benefits that the teams are getting, and which is also reflected in the market transaction prices.
Yep. So one of the things that I'm wondering about, guys, and maybe you can steer my thinking on this. If I think about the NFL, like we were talking, they have their expansion fees, right? They'll have the owners meeting over the wintertime or whatever, and they'll get together and they'll say, yep, we want to go to Las Vegas, or whatever, or Portland, or, wherever the case may be, Toronto. And so they'll open it up and they'll say, yep, we'll accept that. And they're going to pay that, whoever's the new owner for the Toronto franchise of the NFL, they're going to pay a sum of money along with building a stadium and all those other good things. I think my question is, it's pretty easy to see from the NFL's perspective, hey, Toronto has a really interesting demographic that we would like to reach. It's a place where, we're going to have, with preseason, hopefully postseason activities, blah, blah, blah. Eventually a Super Bowl, you're going to have 12, 13 games a year there, right? And so there's going to be all that extra reach, commercial reach within a large population. With Formula One, you're showing up in Austin once a year or Montreal or whatever the case may be. So when you talk about expanding the teams there, in my mind, it becomes a more difficult calculation to see exactly what it would be that an extra team would bring in terms of commercial benefit. Now, that's my brain working. What do you guys see?
I think you hit the nail on the head there. And I think your intuition there, Dick, is absolutely correct. I mean, so when you think about how, let's say, revenue or value is generated in a league such as the NFL or maybe any of the other major American leagues, but having a new team join the league, it means there's going to be more games, right? Because every team is going to play each other a certain number of times. So you now have more games. Well, more games mean more ticket sales. That means more games for broadcasters. And you can understand how that would trickle across the various sources of revenue. Now, when you add a team to the Formula One grid, it doesn't mean there's going to be an additional race. So when we think about the number of events that can be used, as I said, to be televised or to sell tickets and for those types of activities, there's not going to be a direct correlation between an increase in revenue with an increase in number of teams. And I think that's where the economics of a new team joining F1 differ from what we would expect in some of our more traditional American sports, if you will.
Yeah.
And that's why, it's a little bit more nuanced in terms of how do you quantify the value that a team would bring to F1 compared to the value of a team joining the NFL, for example. And I think that was what, I don't know if they said this directly, but I think that's what FOM had alluded to as well. When they came out with their reason in terms of not bringing enough value, they obviously understood that a new team doesn't mean more events, but what it could mean is more competition. And maybe that's how we can capture larger audiences. But that was their whole issue in terms of they didn't think that this new team or the Andretti team would be competitive enough to bring more value than what the other teams would be giving up upon the dilution.
So do you think that what drives, let's say, eyeballs on the TV or spectators, besides just great competition and glitz and glamour and drama and all that kind of stuff, is it people supporting their favorite team, which you could certainly argue is the case with Ferrari, or is it the driver, which would be exemplified by Max Verstappen?
I mean, my personal take is I think it depends on the fan. I think, in other sports, we see that you have these global icons, and no matter what team Lionel Messi or Cristiano Ronaldo are on, they're going to have fans that will follow them across the world to watch them play. And it almost gets to a point where, some of these athletes are bigger than the teams that they might be playing for or might be racing for.
Yep.
And yet you have, other fans that are fans of a team. And no matter who the players are, because all of these players are temporary, given that they're going to, come and go throughout the course of their career, these fans are always going to be a fan of that particular team. And so I think, as I said, it really depends. I mean, as I mentioned before, I grew up in England, so I'm a big European football fan.
Sure.
And I'm a big fan of Manchester United, and I've been a fan of them since I was a young child.
Sure.
And so it doesn't matter who's playing for them and how well they're doing. I will always be a fan. And yet I have friends that are now big fans of F1, and they become fans due to watching the Drive to Survive series.
Yep.
I know they're not fans of the teams, but they're fans of the racers. And no matter what team that racer will be racing for, they will be a fan of that
That's
team.
their guy.
By virtue of their exactly.
No, that's a great point. That's a great point. And because I think about like, in our household, we're, most of us are big Alonso fans, right? So we don't care where Fred is driving. We just want him to be in a good car. I mean, at the end of the day, that's it, right? And so, but on the other hand, like I've got a real affinity for Ferrari because I just love the history of it, so yeah, it's interesting. It's interesting to say the least. And it's, as I think about General Motors, how many rabid General Motors fans are there out there? Well, I'm not necessarily. I mean, I drive General Motors cars, but would I just, wear a yellow General Motors, jersey? Would I be buying their merchandise? I don't know. I mean, maybe. But on the other hand, I know Colton Herta, if he was driving for General Motors, well, man, I can get behind that. How many fans are like that? I mean, I'm just thinking as a fan here, not as a jaded business person,
No, I absolutely agree with that. And, another perspective of it is if you're trying to attract new market, be it fans who have not seen it before, or they are just coming back into the fold after looking at Drive to Survive, the drama, Netflix does a great job of capturing all the drama in the show. But when it's race day, the drama would only be if it's a competitive race. If there is, a bunch of overtaking, tires touching each other, the what do we call the wing, touching each other and breaking into half, or there are pit stops, stuff like that. Obviously, no one getting hurt, but when it's a competitive race, and that's why Monaco is one of the most popular races ever. Because it's always so competitive. There are, such small margins when they are taking turns on these tiny streets. That's what gets the fans involved. So if it's not competitive, if Max Verstappen, as I said earlier, like he has a lead, he's lapping everyone, then no one is really interested in watching it. It's a foregone conclusion that, okay, it's a mistake, but Max is going to win it. But seeing, McLaren coming to the fold and giving Red Bull at least a run for its money, that made it a bit more interesting season this year.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And the potential of Ferrari sneaking in, or Mercedes, or whatever the case may be. I mean, we did have 4 different chassis manufacturers that won, and we haven't had that in a long time, man. It's been a long time.
It certainly has been.
Listening to you, I think if there was a time to test this, an 11th team should enter. It seems like this would be the perfect time to do it. With the changes in the regs, where the valuation has changed, where interest, some could argue the Drive to Survive phenomenon may be on its waning, and this could be a resurge effort that could help in building that, kind of based off of what you said, Dick, if they make really good, wise choices of who they put as their drivers, and that could open up markets. And I'm assuming also, because isn't GM the largest manufacturer in the world right now of cars?
It's either GM or Toyota, I would think.
Yeah, I think I read somewhere that if they're not number one, then they're number two. So from a marketing perspective, if they're trying to go into new markets, this would be another way to sell to FOM. We could be beneficial to you, like it's dual purpose, I would assume, right? Am I on the right track, guys?
I think you're definitely on the right track. And I think also, there's been definitely a lot of growth and momentum in the US market in terms of, we've seen the addition of the third now race in the US at Las Vegas. So I think, with the addition of a new track, the addition of a new team, I'll be really interested to see what nationality the drivers will be for this new team. I recall, with the Andretti application, I think a big part of their pitch was that this would be an all US team, and at least one of the two drivers would be from America. And so I think, that would be also really beneficial to sort of capture the momentum in the market that, appears to be still relatively untapped.
Yeah.
I think it's a great opportunity.
I think we were talking with somebody else. Sabrina and I have had a number of podcasts that we've done this week. And so I'm a little bit woozy in the head, I'm more woozy in the head than usual. But what was interesting to me is that they said, really let Sergio Perez take a year off and get his head back, and then put him in one of the Cadillac cars and then an American as the number two driver, and let Sergio groom the American. And also at the same time, let's play off the whole Latin American thing in Mexico and all that, because GM wants to sell cars down in a massive market south of the border. So to me, that is marketing genius, if you ask me. But what do I know? But it seems like that would be the plan.
And we also have an opinion who that young rookie should be, don't we?
Yes, we do. Yes, we do. He happens to come from Houston. So anyway, yeah, we interviewed Jack Crawford, who is a development driver with Aston Martin, and he runs an F2. It looks like he's going to finish about fourth in the championship. So really, really cool. Obviously if Colton were to make it, that would be fine too. But I think Jack just turned 19, something like that. So anyway, but he's obviously he obviously can pedal a car. That's sure.
Right. Well, and that kind of goes to a question that we've asked many of our guests, is actually the pipeline of American driving talent. Do you see that there? I know you guys are Canadians, but we're all together, right? We're North America.
We really are, yeah.
And so I wonder what you think about American drivers being on the grid, and are there opportunities there? Do you see that from your seat up in Canada?
Yeah, I think I could take this one. I have a bit of experience with this firsthand from the motorcycle perspective. And I think from what I've seen, the reason why I think, typically the grids are dominated by Europeans or maybe Asians, it's almost a cultural thing, I think, or a cultural difference between, that side of the world and us here in North America. Obviously, growing up, everyone wants to be like their celebrity or their biggest fan or their idol. And so I think, when you think about racing, if you want to become a professional racer, whether that's car racing or motorcycle racing, you need to be practicing and exposed to that from a young age. And so I think here in North America, there's so many other sports that people are that have idols, let's say, in those sports, whether that's basketball or football or baseball, you can name it. Whereas I found that growing up in England and in Europe, other than European football, I felt as if there was a big drop off between European football and then all the other sports. And so as a result, racing was very popular. Even in my school that I went to, there were a number of us that were racing, or at least riding and practicing on smaller motorcycles at the age of like 10. And so some of those, I ended up coming to Canada, but some of my friends, ended up racing professionally in the MotoGP series. Wow. And so I think had they had been as good as they were, but here in Canada, they would have never had those opportunities because the level of competition would be much lower. You're kind of fortunate. I know, Dick, at least you are, where you said you live a little more south than us, but even just due to the weather, like the summer season here to practice is so short relative to, people in Europe that can be racing 365 days a year in those really important years. So I think for me, that's sort of the biggest reason. But as we were saying, we are starting to see a lot of growth in the US market. And I think it may take a generation or two, but I think the sooner we can have more Americans on the grid, the better, because then hopefully the younger generation will be idolizing these racers and will be able to pursue, racing from a young age, which I think is critical to sort of reach the level that you need to compete at a level such as Formula One.
You really touched on a really interesting thing when you just talked about the weather. And I hadn't really considered this because I've re-engaged just in the karting community here in North Texas. And man, I mean, there's so much talent that I see. And when you said, oh yeah, you got a short summer season, and I immediately thought about golf because I used to play a lot of golf. In Texas, a lot of really good golfers come from Texas. Why? Because we can play 365 days out of the year. Well, guess what? We're producing a bunch of really good kart racers for the same reason. It's not that there's, we're intrinsically, breeding great golfers or race drivers. It's just they can practice more. And like you said, at the young age, practice is everything.
It is. I mean, that's exactly right. And I think, also thinking about, for young children that are racing, you need to be fortunate enough where you have, parents or family members that are able to support you and, both, financially, but also, just helping you in pursuing your dreams, if you will. And it's a big investment. I mean, I know this myself in terms of racers here or motorcycle racers in Canada. Like we used to go down south during the winter just to practice a little bit more. But I mean, you can imagine the sacrifices that, families have to make to take their children, down south and pack up a trailer and drive your car or your truck in the trailer 20 plus hours just to have some warm weather to practice. Whereas, in Europe, there's also, the tracks are so dense in terms of, within a few hours, you could be at any number of tracks. Yep. Whereas, here in Canada, there's maybe 4 or 5 tracks in all of Ontario that you'd have to maybe drive, 8+ hours to get to some of those.
Yeah.
Whereas, like I said, in the UK, within a couple of hours, you could be at, an array of different tracks. So I think I think actually it's funny, but I think where you're located geographically has such a big factor. And us being, up here in Canada, just a little bit north of the border, I think it's even harder to have, the development of racers just given where we're located.
That's an amazing thing. And I hadn't really thought about it a whole lot, but I think you're 100% right. You're absolutely right. Because I've always walked around going, because you see these 10 and 11-year-old kids that have been racing since they were 5, and they might as well be just at least semi-pros already, and you just tell by the way they walk. You can just, they've got that edge. And I think it's just, like you said, they're just out there all day long, it's amazing.
This is kind of a point that I persuaded myself as to why my friends in the UK went on to be professionals. And I'm now an accountant. So at least that's what helps me sleep at night.
That's right.
Well, I want to actually go back to something that Shalabh had said, and it was about females in motorsport. We've been talking about just driver development in general, but going into a specific group that a lot in Formula One has been focused on is females coming into the sport as drivers. I wonder what your thoughts were on that, any of you.
Yeah, I can start and then I can pass it over to Shalabh because he did mention something about that. So I think, to speak for everyone, we would love to see that. We have seen it in the past. I did a bit of research before the call, and I saw in 1958. That was when there was the first female driver, Maria Teresa de Filippi. And then I guess like to kind of bring up the points that we were making about, I think Amran had mentioned Manchester United and how he grew up there and cheered for that team. And then with the bid that they made, they were kind of teasing a U.S. team. And it goes back to representation. Representation matters. And where you're from, you feel a really deep sense of belonging with where you come from. And if you're able to, see someone on the screen that looks like you're going to want to pursue the sport. So it does increase the opportunity where you come into a young age and you're able to then get that, they say 10,000 hours or whatever it is for motorsport, to be able to actually get to a level where you can compete in Formula One and drive in Formula One. So it's great to see like the F1 Academy, and see like the Marta Garcia as the champion. And then kind of just to speak on from where I'm from, Toronto, and the Toronto Raptors. They just retired Vince Carter's jersey. And it's a bit of a controversy because of kind of the facts around him leaving, but he did a lot for Canadian basketball, and you see that now, right?
Yeah.
People saw Vince Carter on the screen dunking a basketball, and they decided to pursue their dreams. And they said, hey, like if he's doing it here in Toronto, why that could be me. And now we see in the NBA, the highest amount of people outside of the US playing is from Canada. And you see the growth of the Canadian basketball team. So yeah, to bring it back to your question about seeing females in motorsport, I think we are seeing like more people be able to, but in terms of like the tangibility of it, it comes back to, okay, how do you make sure that you get females into the sport early on so that they can develop the competencies you need in order to then be a Formula One driver? Because yeah, it's not easy. There's only 20 drivers,
20 seats now. Yeah.
20 seats, right? So that's you got to lower the barriers. Yeah, I'll pass it on to anyone else who wants to piggyback on that.
No, thank you, Daniel, and that's a great insight. And just to add on to that, I think women's sports in general is seeing a surge. So if you would, take a step back and focus on all different sports, so be it basketball, Caitlin Clark is, doing amazing. If you would look at European football, all the teams are now also, competing their female teams. They are getting unbundled from the valuation perspective. Their commercial contracts are becoming more valuable. Their broadcasting rights are becoming more valuable. So there is definitely a surge and interest in investing into women in general as an athlete. And Formula One seems to be the next stop because if you would think about it, the F1 Academy, which has not been around for long, is showing tremendous promise. And it's only a matter of time when, females, as they have in every other sector, they'll catch up. And I'm hoping that there would be teams which would have a male and a female driver racing around and winning races. So it's definitely a possibility, and we hope it happens sooner rather than later.
Yeah. I mean, you think about like a Danica Patrick, not a world beater in terms of talent, yet pretty damn good. And highly marketable, right?
Absolutely.
And so you think about her and the fans that she drew to NASCAR. I mean, she was popular at IndyCar too, but then she went to NASCAR and it was like kaboom. She exploded in popularity. So, you could use Danica as a model for what it could be, and so, yeah, I agree with you guys. I think you talk about opening up a whole new demographic. You think about the, call it 10 to 20-year-old female. Man, they're already interested in F1, but if you had one of them competing against the boys, so to speak, I think the growth would be exponential.
100%.
Yep.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think the key is it has to be a woman who's competent and in the sport. And I think that'll only inspire women to want to follow in that. If I know for me, I would not want it to be that the barriers are lowered in the sense of expectation is less, as much as the gate is removed. You see the difference I'm drawing. And I think that's what you meant, Daniel. And I think that it's great that not only are sports in general, but especially that Formula One is making an effort to provide those opportunities. And I do think that we should see that in 10 years, because it's going to take time. The girls have to have access starting as early as the karting. I know we have that there, but at a higher level, and then just developing them throughout the process I think in all the series. We've actually had a conversation with a karter who is a professional. He really pursues it as a profession. And his distinction of seeing karting as an entry to motorsport is unfair. And I agree with him after listening to him that it's its own discipline. And so if we allow young female drivers to see that there's so many opportunities available to them within various disciplines within motorsport, and teach them the racecraft, teach them the technical and how to be the best opportunity package for a team regardless of discipline, it's only going to help the whole community as a whole. So yeah. Well, absolutely. Dick, I know that time is running, and as we've said in other conversations, we have day jobs, and your day job is actually calling you. And of course, these three guys were so awesome to get on this conversation with us. I wonder if they will do this again. Is there a thumbs up or thumbs down? Yay.
100%.
I even have a better idea. You and I will go up to Toronto and we'll find a really good bar and we'll set up our podcast equipment there, and then we'll have that conversation.
Oh, that's cool.
With a couple of adult beverages, I think these guys would be absolutely ready to go.
Yeah, that'd be great. Are you guys going to go to any of the races next year?
We've been planning to go to a few of them next year for sure.
Okay,
Yeah,
well, if you come down to CODA, let us know.
For sure, yeah. Thank you
Okay.
so much for your time, guys. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Your insights. Thanks for writing that article. And
Yeah,
I
it's
mean,
fascinating conversation, guys.
and I'm going to make sure to put a link to your article in our show notes so that way people can see that. And because it's well worth the time of being able to understand and educate ourselves as to how this works inside the sport. So thank you, Three, for what you're doing to make the sport better. Okay, friends, what did you think of our conversation? Drop me a line via email, sabrina@2guysagirlandf1.com. Can you help us out? If you haven't already, please take a moment to follow us and give us 5 stars on your favorite podcast app, as well as share this episode with other F1 fans. We know our growth is because of you, and the guys and I thank you. And with that, let me say, we'll keep talking and you can keep listening in, because we're just 2 guys, a girl, and F1. For John, Dick, and me, Sabrina, thanks for listening.